I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. The rift between President Trump and the governor of California has continued as Trump calls Gavin Newsom incompetent and says that he was unable to provide protection after LA riots in a timely manner. Greg Abbott, the governor of Texas, says he will deploy the National Guard this week ahead of planned protests. Gaza rescuers say that Israeli fire has killed 31 people near an aid centre in Gaza. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio has condemned sanctions on Israeli ministers, saying the United States stands shoulder to shoulder with Israel. Iran's defense minister has threatened to target US bases across the Middle East if conflict breaks out amid a continued standoff over uranium enrichment. US President Donald Trump has previously warned of military action if a nuclear deal cannot be agreed on. Deadly Russian strikes have been reported in Ukraine, with 3 killed in Kharkiv and damage reported in Odessa. Meanwhile, Russia says the swap of heavily wounded prisoners of war will begin on Thursday after Moscow returned the bodies of more than 1,200 Ukrainian soldiers, receiving 27 bodies from Kyiv. Police in Austria have found a makeshift bomb with discarded plans at the home of the suspect in a school shooting attack that took place in Graz. Thousands of mourners gathered in silence for a candlelit vigil after 10 people were killed before the gunman killed himself. President Trump says that a trade deal with China is done, including the sale of rare earth minerals. It comes after 2 days of intense negotiations in London, where the United States and China agreed to ease export curbs and keep the tariff truce. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has praised a federal appeals court decision that upholds his sweeping tariff measures, calling it a great important win for the US. The court has allowed the continuation of tariffs as it reviews a decision from a lower court to block them. They accuse Trump of exceeding his authority. Elon Musk says that he regrets some of the posts he made about US President Donald Trump, stating they went too far. Trump and Musk's partnership broke down after a public spat, starting with criticism over the president's big, beautiful bill. We start this hour in North America, and the United States is grappling with a surge of unrest sparked by protests against immigration raids, and Los Angeles remains at the heart of the storm. President Donald Trump has vowed that troops will remain in place in Los Angeles until there is peace, warning that without intervention, the city would be in ruins. In response to days of unrest, Mayor Karen Bass had imposed an overnight curfew in downtown Los Angeles aimed at curbing vandalism and looting. Despite the measures, protesters continue to fill the streets, with police making mass arrests. The Los Angeles Police Department report that 197 arrests were made in a single day, saying those who defy the curfew without cause will be taken into custody. Meanwhile, in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott has deployed the National Guard to multiple cities, stressing that acts of violence and destruction will be met with force. Authorities across the country now brace for more protests as tensions continue to escalate. Well, joining us once again on the programme to discuss all of these developments is Raymond Vickery, the former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joining us from Washington, D.C. Raymond, thank you once again for joining us today. We're now looking at these riots and unrest which have caused destruction and chaos in LA. They are expected to continue across the United States. What's your opinion, firstly, on how the Trump administration has dealt with these unrests?
Well, thanks again, Joshua, for having me. It seems to me that this effort by Trump is a part of his plan, really, to change the form of government in the United States. I don't think that's too stark an appraisal. He has shown his hostility to the constitutional system in the United States of checks and balances by the courts and by the legislature. He intends to rule as an authoritarian Dictatorship is really, in my view, not too strong a word. And the first step in the militarization of the United States government has been to replace people in the Department of Defense and in the armed services with loyalists. In his first term, he had people who would constrain him. Defense Secretary Esper, General Milley, they wouldn't go along. They had a higher duty to the Constitution of the United States. But what has happened is that Trump, in spite of taking an oath to protect and defend the Constitution, really has done exactly the opposite. And the first step in that, of course, was militarization of the border. And now he's moved on to defy really United States law, which prevents the use of the United States military for civilian purposes, using as a pretext that there's some sort of rebellion going on, and that he can order out not only the National Guard, but the Marines in order to be able to do this. And he made it perfectly clear yesterday in his speech at Fort Bragg that this is what he intends to do. Now the question is what happens next? The first question is, will the courts and the Supreme Court really stand up to him in regard to this unlawful, unconstitutional militarization? That is by no means assured, but it appears that the Supreme Court will not go along with the most extreme version of what Trump has in mind. And then the question is, what will President Trump do? Will he obey or not? In the case of Abrego Garcia, the man who was unlawfully deported to El Salvador, defied the courts, eventually bringing him back, but then making him face criminal charges. If he defies the courts here, then the question is going to be whether or not there will be officials in the U.S. government who will say this is an unlawful order and stand up on that. Ultimately, the only salvation that I see here is in the electorate. And we will have midterm elections coming up next year. Will the electorate go along with this or not? That is an open question, but I would remind your viewers and listeners that President Trump only won by a very small margin last time. In other words, if there had been shifts in key states of only a few thousands of voters, he would not have won. So there is a substantial chance that the American electorate will rein this in, but that is, in my view, the ultimate hope for being able to save our democratic form of government in the United States. We need help from other democracies to try to help shore up the democratic system, not only in the United States, but across the world. So the question is, will there be, not only within the United States, but internationally from other great democracies like India, in Europe, Japan, support for the rule of law and democracy?
Yes, Raymond, I want to build on the political aspect of this. Of course, we know that Trump has been polarizing with a lot of his policies, immigration, one of those. Do you think Trump doesn't mind that he's polarizing here? Because as long as he has his supporters behind him in the decisions he's making, and that is a majority, as we know, he won the House, the Senate, the popular vote, and of course the presidency. For him, do you think this is a risk worth taking as long as he pleases those that put him in power?
Well, I think he relishes the confrontation. I think he relishes the confrontation not only with those who are protesting, but people like Governor Newsom and people who have tried to stand up. This is the proven game plan of a person who wants to be an authoritarian dictator, to rule by decree, and that is to create more and more of the civil unrest, and then use that as a reason to be able to impose greater authoritarian approaches to the government. So I don't have any question that he thinks that he's going to come out on top. And unfortunately, we have a history, a recent history, the George Floyd riots, if you will, in 2020 strengthened the hand eventually as there was a reaction to it. And so it is a downward kind of spiral. But there is hope. If it goes too far, people in the United States do not want to see millions and millions of people rounded up, put into concentration camps, and shipped off to places like Guantanamo and El Salvador. So he is running a great risk, but it's a very dicey situation here, and one, as I say, in which democratic measures need the support of the international democratic community.
Yes, absolutely. Raymond Vickery, thank you ever so much for joining us. We will cover all of those developments in the United States as they continue, with further unrest expected in the coming days. We move on now, though, and significant developments have unfolded in the ongoing conflict as Russian drone strikes have hit the city of Kharkiv, killing 3 civilians and injuring 61 others, including children. According to local officials, they say residential areas were targeted in another escalation of the war. Meanwhile, the United States has announced a reduction in military aid to Ukraine under its proposed 2026 defence budget. Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth stated the move is part of a strategic reorientation, calling for NATO to shoulder more of Europe's defence burden. Ukraine and Russia have cooperated with each other and completed a second round of prisoner exchanges, with over 1,200 fallen Ukrainian soldiers' bodies returned and another round set for Thursday. And finally, ceasefire talks between the United States and Russia will shift from Istanbul to Moscow, marking a tentative step towards dialogue, though both sides remain deeply divided. Well, joining us to discuss these developments is Dr. Sergei Dvoryanov, President of the IDC Russia and Director of the WHD International Board, joining us from Moscow in Russia. While we wait for Dr. Dvoryanov to rejoin us, just to recalibrate you with the ongoing peace negotiation situation, 2 rounds of talks have taken place in Istanbul, direct talks between Russia and Ukraine, the first for over 3 years. While talks were brief, prisoner exchanges had been agreed, and the US and Western allies have been calling for a 30-day ceasefire, something Ukraine have been positive for. But in that situation, of course, Russia have not agreed to that level of ceasefire. Negotiations continue, and we will continue to bring you all of those updates. Dr. Dvoryanov won't be able to join us, so we will now move on. Austrian police have recovered a non-functional homemade bomb from the home of a 21-year-old gunman who killed 10 people in a mass shooting at his former school in Graz, Austria's second largest city. Authorities said the suspect, armed with a shotgun and a pistol, opened fire across multiple floors of the secondary school before taking his own life in a bathroom. Investigators are now combing through his online activity and personal effects, searching for clues to his motive. While some Austrian media reports he may have felt bullied, police have not confirmed this. Here is what Gerald Ortner, Strine Police Chief, and Gerhard Kahner, Federal Minister of the Interior, have had to say after the attack.
Mutmaßlichen Täter handelt es sich um einen 21-jährigen Österreicher aus dem Bezirk Graz-Umgebung. Nach derzeitigem Kenntnisstand wurden bei der Tat 2 Schusswaffen verwendet, die am Tatort sichergestellt werden konnten. Diese Waffen werden nun kriminaltechnisch untersucht. Der mutmaßliche Täter dürfte die Waffen legal besessen haben.
Es ist bekannt und auch zu berichten, dass er Schüler dieser Schule auch war, diese Schule nicht abgeschlossen hat. Alles andere, und es sind viele Dinge zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt spekuliert worden, ist eben Spekulation. Und das ist Aufgabe jetzt des Landeskriminalamtes und der Federführung des Landeskriminalamtes, die Hintergründe zu ermitteln.
Well, religious studies teacher Paul Nitscher recalled seeing the suspect trying to shoot a lock off the door before fleeing. I thought this can't be real, he told ORF. Here is what one of the students had to say about the incident.
Surreal situation, and all of us are not quite sure how to deal with it. It's way too early, and in the name of my school, students and teachers and everybody, I would ask all the media to have the greatest respect of all of us and to leave us alone, mostly because it's way too early, it's way too traumatizing for most of the students, and we would like to stay, to have our peace and to stay together. And yeah, it's hard to explain how it feels.
The attack, one of the deadliest in Austria's modern history, has prompted renewed calls for tighter gun laws. Graz's mayor urged immediate reforms, and RUF acknowledged the need to address any legal loopholes. In response to the tragedy, the country has declared 3 days of national mourning. Thousands gathered in Graz's central square on Tuesday evening to honour the victims. Well, joining us to discuss this tragic incident and the wider ramifications is Jonathan Hoffman, the former Vice President of the Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom, who is joining us from London. Jonathan, thank you ever so much for being here. I myself have spent most of my life in Europe. Of course, gun laws, gun restrictions are in place, so a shooting of this scale at a school is rare. What was your first opinion after hearing this news?
It was a dreadful tragedy, and I think certainly Austria, I understand, has one of the highest gun ownership proportions in Europe. Surely they will be thinking about tightening their gun laws now. Of course, the worst country for gun crime is the United States, where it's a constitutional right to bear a gun, and it seems impossible to oppose the National Rifle Association, which is a very powerful lobby there, and people have tried to tighten gun laws in the States, and it's proved very difficult. But I think I'm sure that the Austrian government will be reassessing their gun laws now.
Yes, absolutely. A tragedy of this kind often stirs conversation. Of course, the information about the prime suspect has not yet been released in terms of a name, but we do have some information, a former student. Given that there are reports in the media that there was potential bullying, do you think more needs to be done in these instances, potentially around safeguarding not just people within schools, but also potential perpetrators if they are experiencing stuff like bullying within school, and the psychological impact that could have?
Well, I don't know the Austrian system, but surely if somebody leaves school with a grudge or having been bullied, then somebody needs to keep a watch on them. But it's easy to say that, but very difficult to monitor people like that. It just requires a lot of manpower and technical manpower to be able to do that. It's very hard to prevent these kinds of atrocities. I think maybe almost impossible, but I'm sure that the government in Austria will be thinking very hard about what it can do to prevent a repeat of this terrible tragedy.
Yes, absolutely. And the country, of course, is in mourning, a period of mourning to be acknowledged across Austria after this devastating attack, with young lives lost. This situation has resonated across the world, also in Europe too. Do you think that there would be any wider ramifications across Europe given the scale of the attack? We've had recent shootings in Sweden as well. Do you think gun violence is something that European leaders, European emergency services should be more wary of now, given the increasing number of gun attacks we're seeing like this one in Austria?
Well, even though Austria is a member of the European Union, the fact is that these domestic issues are still the responsibility of national police forces and national governments. So I think it's unlikely to see any response on a European Union-wide basis. But I'm sure that other governments will be looking at their own gun laws and how easy it is to get hold of a gun, whether legally or illegally. I haven't seen whether the culprit had a legal gun, whether he had a license or not. I don't know if that's come out yet, but surely if it was a legal gun, then they have to tighten up the conditions as a result of this atrocity.
Yes, as far as we understand, that there were licenses in place for the weapons that were used in this incident. I want to bring it back to the incident itself. Police have searched the residency of the prime suspect and found a pipe bomb and also a potential plan, along with a letter to the suspect's parents. This could have been a lot worse if that plan was carried out. There is, of course, positivity over the fact that that wasn't the case, but still despair for so many, a country that has been rocked by this incident. As we look forward now, Jonathan, how can an incident like this be reflected upon and learnt from, as opposed to being seen as a dark day in history? We've spoken about potential gun laws. What else could be seen from the government of Austria and police forces to really turn a positive page after this day of darkness?
Well, I think that inevitably and probably regrettably, I think surveillance has to increase to keep people safe. I think that the challenge is to spot potential murderers before they strike. All sorts of things can be done, like facial recognition, for example. Maybe detaining people who are suspects even though they haven't committed a crime. If you think they're likely to commit a crime, then they need to be watched very carefully and possibly detained. I think that really that's the only way. But I think in the price of having a free society is that there will be occasional incidents like this, unfortunately. But I think the authorities have to do everything possible to try to spot problems before they arise.
Yes, Jonathan Hoffman, thank you ever so much for joining us. Of course, our thoughts are with those affected by the incident in Austria. But that is all we have time for. We'll continue to bring you more of the latest news from across